April 16, 1993. 5:47 hours. The narrow dirt road cutting through the hills outside Vitez, central Bosnia, lay silent under a cold dawn mist. Sergeant Michael Harrison, a 31-year-old peacekeeper with the British Army's Cheshire Regiment deployed under UNPROFOR, the United Nations Protection Force, sat in the passenger seat of a white Land Rover bearing the UN's sky blue insignia. His breath fogged the window as he scanned the tree line, alert for movement. Behind him, two more vehicles crawled in convoy formation, transporting medical supplies and food rations to a Croatian village cut off by weeks of ethnic cleansing and Serb artillery bombardment. This was his 43rd patrol since arriving in Bosnia 6 months earlier. He had grown accustomed to the tension, the unpredictability, the constant knowledge that peacekeeping here was less about keeping peace and more about surviving the crossfire of three armies determined to carve this land into bleeding pieces. The Bosnian War had erupted in April 1992, fracturing Yugoslavia into chaotic ethnic territories where Bosnian Muslims, Croats, and Serbs fought street by street, village by village, leaving over 2 million displaced and thousands dead. UNPROFOR had deployed to facilitate humanitarian aid, monitor ceasefires, and protect civilians in designated safe areas. A mandate that sounded noble in New York, but proved brutally impractical in the Balkans, where commanders on all sides viewed UN troops not as neutral arbiters, but as obstacles or leverage. Harrison knew this intimately. He had watched French peacekeepers get pinned down by sniper fire in Sarajevo. He had seen Danish engineers struck by mortar shells while clearing roads. He had stood helpless as Bosnian Serb forces blocked aid convoys for days, letting children starve while politicians negotiated. The rules of engagement were maddeningly restrictive. Peacekeepers could only return fire if directly attacked, and even then, proportionality mattered more than survival. Harrison carried his L85A1 rifle loaded, but safetied, knowing that firing it could escalate an incident into an international crisis. Yet he also knew that restraint could mean death. The landscape around Vitez bore the scars of war. Burnt farmhouses with roofs collapsed, orchards pockmarked by shell craters, livestock rotting in fields. The roads were minefields, both literally and figuratively. Anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, improvised explosive devices planted by retreating forces or vengeful militias littered the countryside. UNPROFOR engineers worked tirelessly to clear routes, but the sheer volume of ordnance made travel a gamble. Harrison's convoy had been briefed on the route, a 12-kilometer stretch deemed low risk by intelligence officers who rarely left their bases. Low risk didn't mean safe. It meant the odds of dying were slightly better than elsewhere. Harrison checked his map again, cross-referencing landmarks. They had passed the burnt Orthodox church at the crossroads 3 minutes ago. The next waypoint was a stone bridge over a narrow creek, beyond which lay the village. He glanced at his driver, Corporal David Evans, a 24-year-old from Manchester, who had joined the regiment 2 years prior. Evans gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Neither man spoke. They had learned that silence conserved energy, that words carried weight in this place where every sound could be a warning. The convoy rounded a bend, and the stone bridge came into view. Harrison signaled Evans to slow down. Protocol demanded they inspect the bridge before crossing. Mines were often placed beneath or beside spans like these, triggered remotely or by pressure plates. Harrison radioed the vehicles behind him, instructing them to halt while he and Evans conducted a visual sweep. He stepped out of the Land Rover, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled of wet earth and distant smoke. Birds called from the forest, an incongruous sound in a war zone. Harrison approached the bridge cautiously, scanning for wires, disturbed soil, anything out of place. The bridge appeared intact, its stonework ancient and weathered, untouched by the conflict. He crouched, inspecting the underside. Nothing. He stood, about to wave Evans forward, when movement caught his eye. To his left, 30 meters uphill, a figure emerged from the trees. Harrison froze. The figure wore mismatched camouflage, a hallmark of irregular militia, and carried an AK-47. Harrison raised a hand in a slow, non-threatening gesture, the universal signal for, "I see you. We're not enemies." The fighter didn't lower his weapon. Then another appeared. And another. 5 men. spread across the hillside, weapons trained on the convoy. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't an ambush in the explosive sense. No one was firing yet, but it was a test. The fighters were gauging whether the UN would resist or comply. Harrison knew the calculus. If he reached for his rifle, they'd open fire. If he showed weakness, they'd exploit it, possibly taking hostages or stealing supplies. He kept his hands visible, speaking calmly into his radio in a voice designed to project authority without aggression. Contact. 5 armed individuals, hillside left. No hostile action yet. Stand by. He turned toward the fighters, speaking in slow, deliberate English, hoping at least one understood. We are United Nations peacekeepers. We're delivering humanitarian aid to civilians. We're not your enemy. One of the fighters, older than the others, stepped forward. He spat on the ground and shouted something in Serbo-Croatian that Harrison didn't catch. The tone was clear. Contempt, suspicion, anger. The man gestured at the Land Rover, then at the supplies in the back. He wanted to inspect them, or perhaps take them. Harrison weighed his options. Allowing the inspection might defuse the situation, but it would also establish a precedent that UN convoys could be stopped and searched at will, undermining their neutrality and safety. Refusing could provoke violence. He decided on a middle path. He would offer transparency without submission. We're carrying food and medicine for the village ahead, Harrison said, pulling a manifest from his vest pocket and holding it up. You can verify, but we need to proceed. People are depending on this delivery. The older fighter stared at him for a long moment, then lowered his rifle fractionally. He barked an order to the others, and they began to descend the hill. Harrison's pulse didn't slow. This was still dangerous. He glanced back at Evans, who had his hand on his rifle but hadn't drawn it. Smart. The fighters reached the convoy, moving to the rear vehicle where the bulk of the supplies were stored. They opened crates, inspecting contents, occasionally pocketing items, cigarettes, batteries, small luxuries. Harrison let it slide. Losing a few non-essential items was preferable to losing lives. After 5 tense minutes, the older fighter nodded, apparently satisfied. He gestured for his men to withdraw. They climbed back up the hill, disappearing into the trees as quickly as they had appeared. Harrison exhaled slowly, forcing his body to relax. He radioed the all clear and climbed back into the Land Rover. Evans started the engine, and the convoy resumed its crawl forward. They crossed the bridge without incident. The village appeared ahead, a cluster of damaged houses clinging to the hillside. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, a sign that people still lived here despite everything. Harrison's role was to deliver the supplies, assess civilian needs, and report back to HQ. It was unglamorous work, far removed from the heroic image of soldiering he had once held. But it mattered. These people had lost everything except their will to survive. If UNPROFOR could keep them fed and safe for one more day, it was worth the risk. The convoy pulled into the village square, and Harrison stepped out to meet the local headman, an elderly Croat named Ante who had coordinated the delivery. Ante's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow with fatigue and grief. They shook hands, and Ante led Harrison to a makeshift clinic where injured civilians waited. A French medic attached to UNPROFOR was already treating patients. Shrapnel wounds, infected cuts, malnutrition-related illnesses. Harrison helped unload the supplies, distributing boxes to villagers who queued silently, clutching empty bags in desperate hope. Children stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, their faces too serious for their age. War had stolen their childhood, replacing it with hunger and fear. Harrison knelt beside a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, and handed her a package of biscuits. She took it without smiling, clutching it to her chest as if it might disappear. He stood, swallowing the lump in his throat. This was why he was here. Not for glory or medals, but for these small, fragile moments of decency amid the chaos. The delivery took 2 hours. By mid-morning, the convoy was ready to depart. Harrison briefed Ante on the next scheduled delivery, promised to relay requests for additional medical supplies, and climbed back into the Land Rover. The return journey would follow a different route, standard procedure to avoid predictable patterns that could be exploited. Evans started the engine, and they rolled out of the village, waving to the villagers who watched them leave. The road back was rougher, less maintained, winding through dense forest and steep ravines. Harrison consulted his map, marking their progress. They had covered 8 kilometers when the world exploded. And before we continue, tell us where you're listening from and how old you are. Which World War II story impacted you the most? Write it in the comments. Your support helps this channel bring these real stories to more people. The blast wave hit before the sound registered. Harrison felt himself lifted from his seat, suspended in a moment of weightless confusion before gravity reasserted itself with brutal force. The Land Rover lurched violently to the left, its front axle shattered by the explosion beneath. Metal screamed, glass shattered. The vehicle pitched into the roadside ditch, rolling once before slamming to a stop on its side. Harrison's world became a kaleidoscope of pain and disorientation. His head struck something hard, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle, pinned between the collapsed dashboard and the seat frame. Darkness flickered at the edges of his vision. The ringing in his ears muted everything to a distant hum. Through the shattered windscreen, he saw smoke billowing from a crater in the road where they had just been driving. An anti-tank mine. TMA-3 or possibly a Yugoslav-made TMRP-6, judging by the blast pattern. Devices designed to destroy armored vehicles, more than capable of obliterating a soft-skinned Land Rover. The mine had been pressure-activated, triggered when the front wheels crossed its threshold. Standard guerrilla tactic, plant mines on secondary routes that UN forces use to avoid main roads, knowing peacekeepers rotated their patterns to avoid ambushes. Harrison tried to move. His upper body responded, but his left leg remained trapped, a dead weight sending sharp signals of agony through his nervous system. He looked down, and immediately wished he hadn't. His leg from mid-thigh down was crushed beneath twisted metal and plastic, blood soaking through his trousers at an alarming rate. The femoral artery. The thought came clinically, detached, as if observing someone else's injury. If the artery was severed, he had minutes, not hours. Shock would follow blood loss, then unconsciousness, then death. Evans. Harrison turned his head, fighting nausea. The driver's side had taken less damage, but Evans hung suspended by his seatbelt, unconscious, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. His chest rose and fell, alive at least. Harrison reached for his radio with trembling fingers, found it still clipped to his vest. He pressed the transmit button. 0, this is Bravo 2-1. Contact, mine strike. Vehicle disabled, casualties, request immediate case vac, grid reference. His voice faltered as he tried to recall their exact position. The map had been on his lap. Now it was somewhere in the wreckage. The radio crackled. Bravo 2-1, 0. Confirm location and casualty status. The voice was calm, professional. Someone back at the operations center in Vitez, sitting in relative safety while Harrison bled out in a ditch. He forced himself to focus, recalling landmarks. Approximately 2 kilometers south of Waypoint Charlie. Driver unconscious, head trauma. I'm trapped. Leg injury, possible arterial bleed. Vehicle 1 is combat ineffective. Request Vehicle 2 provide security and assist. Behind him, the second Land Rover had stopped 50 meters back. Standard spacing to prevent multiple vehicles hitting the same mine. Harrison heard doors opening, voices shouting. Corporal Jenkins and Private Thompson from the trail vehicle were dismounting, but their movements were cautious, deliberate. The road was now a confirmed minefield. Rushing to Harrison's aid could trigger another explosion. This was the nightmare scenario every peacekeeper dreaded. Wounded comrades in a kill zone, help meters away, but unable to approach safely. Jenkins' voice came over the radio. Sarge, we see you. Stay calm. We're coming, but we need to clear a path. Can you apply a tourniquet? Harrison looked at his trapped leg again. A tourniquet required access to the limb above the wound. His leg was buried under half a ton of vehicle. Negative. Leg is pinned. I can't reach it. He heard Jenkins curse softly, then begin coordinating with Thompson. They would need to manually probe the ground with bayonets, checking for buried mines every few centimeters, a process that could take 20 minutes or more. Harrison didn't have 20 minutes. He turned his attention to Evans, reaching across the gap between their seats. His fingers found Evans' neck, pressing against the carotid artery. Strong pulse. Good. He shook Evans' shoulder. Dave, wake up. I need you, mate. No response. Harrison slapped Evans's cheek lightly, then harder. Evans's eyelids fluttered, and he groaned. That's it. Come on, Dave. Stay with me. Evans's eyes opened, unfocused and confused. What happened? His voice was slurred, concussed. Mine. We hit a mine. You're okay, but I need you to get out and help Jenkins clear a path. Can you do that? Evans blinked, processing. His gaze drifted to Harrison's leg, and his face went pale. Jesus, Sarge. Harrison grabbed his collar, pulling him closer. Listen to me. I'm bleeding out. Every second counts. I need you functional. Can you move? Evans nodded slowly, reaching for his seatbelt release. The belt clicked free, and he half fell, half climbed out through the shattered driver's window, disappearing from view. Harrison lay back, breathing shallow, trying to conserve energy and slow his heart rate to reduce blood loss. The pain was immense now, a white-hot fire spreading from his leg through his entire body. He fumbled for his medical pouch, extracting a morphine auto-injector. Military doctrine advised against self-administering opioids when trapped and bleeding. The risk of overdose or respiratory depression was high, but the pain was overwhelming rational thought. He hesitated, then jammed the injector into his thigh above the injury site. The drug hit his system within seconds, dulling the agony to a manageable roar. Outside, he heard Jenkins directing Evans and Thompson. Slow, probe every inch, watch for tripwires, don't disturb anything. The methodical tap-tap-tap of bayonets striking soil became a rhythm, each strike a gamble that the next wouldn't detonate another mine. Harrison checked his watch. 11:03 hours, 16 minutes since the blast. How much blood had he lost? A liter? More? His fingers were cold, his skin clammy. Classic shock symptoms. He forced himself to stay alert, focusing on his breathing, counting each inhale and exhale. The radio crackled again. Bravo 210. Casevac is inbound. ETA 25 minutes. French armored ambulance from Travnik. Hold on. 25 minutes. It might as well be 25 hours. Harrison keyed the mic. Copy. Tell them to bring hydraulic cutters. I'm pinned under the dash. He released the mic and closed his eyes, conserving strength. The morphine wrapped him in a distant haze, softening the edges of reality, but not erasing the fundamental truth. He was dying. A scraping sound brought him back. Jenkins' face appeared at the passenger window, streaked with sweat and dirt. We're here, Sarge. Cleared a path. Thompson's getting the medical kit. We're going to stop the bleeding. Harrison nodded weakly. Jenkins climbed halfway through the window, assessing the situation. His face betrayed nothing, but Harrison saw the calculation in his eyes. This was bad. Very bad. Jenkins pulled out a combat tourniquet, a simple band of nylon with a windlass rod designed to occlude blood flow. But Harrison's leg was inaccessible. We need to lift the dash, Jenkins said. Thompson, get the jack from Vehicle 2. Move. Thompson sprinted back, returning moments later with a hydraulic jack used for tire changes. Jenkins positioned it carefully, working it between the collapsed dashboard and the floor. This is going to hurt, Sarge. Ready? Harrison braced himself. Do it. Jenkins pumped the jack. Metal groaned, shifting incrementally. Harrison's leg exploded in fresh agony as pressure redistributed. He bit down on his glove, muffling a scream. The dashboard lifted 5 centimeters. 10. Enough for Jenkins to slip the tourniquet around Harrison's thigh, high and tight. He cranked the windlass, tightening the band until the arterial bleed slowed to a trickle. Harrison's vision swam, nausea rising. Stay with us, Sarge, Jenkins said, slapping his face lightly. Ambulance is close. You're going to make it. Harrison wanted to believe him, but he had seen enough battlefield injuries to know the truth. His leg was destroyed, shattered bone, severed muscle, torn vessels. Even if he survived, the leg was finished. The sound of heavy engines grew louder. The French armored ambulance, a VAB variant modified for medical evacuation, rumbled into view, its 6 wheels navigating the rough terrain with ease. French medics dismounted, carrying stretchers and advanced medical kits. They worked with practiced efficiency, assessing Harrison's injuries, starting an IV line, administering fluids and antibiotics. One medic conferred with Jenkins in broken English. We must extract him. The leg is very bad. We need to stabilize before moving. They brought hydraulic cutters, industrial-strength tools designed to slice through vehicle frames. The noise was deafening, as blades bit into metal, peeling away the dashboard piece by piece. Harrison drifted in and out of consciousness, the morphine and blood loss pulling him toward darkness. He heard voices, French, English, a blur of urgent commands. Hands gripped him, lifting carefully. Pain flared, then receded. He was on a stretcher, being carried to the ambulance. Overhead, the sky was impossibly blue. Inside the armored ambulance, the French medics worked to stabilize him for transport to the surgical facility in Travnik. One medic examined his leg, speaking rapidly in French to his colleague. Harrison caught fragments. Fracture. Artère. Amputation possible. The word hung in the air. Amputation. The leg was too damaged to save. He had known it instinctively, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. The career he loved, the identity he had built, gone. Replaced by what? A disability pension? A prosthetic limb? A lifetime of pitying looks? The ambulance accelerated, its armored hull offering protection as it raced toward Travnik. Inside, monitors beeped, tracking Harrison's vital signs. Blood pressure dropping. Heart rate elevated. The medics increased the IV drip, pushing more fluids into his system. One leaned close, speaking in accented English. "You are strong, mon ami. You will survive this. The surgeons are very good." Harrison wanted to respond, to thank him, but his tongue felt thick and uncooperative. Darkness closed in. Harrison woke to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the rhythmic beep of medical monitors. White ceiling tiles swam into focus above him, fluorescent lights harsh against his eyes. His mouth was dry, his throat raw. He tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain radiated from his left side, duller than before but persistent. A deep ache that spoke of surgical intervention and trauma. A nurse appeared in his peripheral vision, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a French accent. "Monsieur Harrison, you are awake. Good. I will get the doctor." She disappeared before he could speak. He lay still, taking inventory of his body. His arms responded. His torso, though sore, felt intact. His right leg shifted when he commanded it. His left leg, he couldn't feel it. Not the absence of sensation, but the complete void where his leg should be. Panic fluttered in his chest. He lifted his head, looking down the length of his body. The blanket covering him lay flat where his left leg should have created a raised contour. It ended at mid-thigh. The rest was gone. A surgeon entered, a French army doctor named Capitaine Rousseau, still wearing surgical scrubs beneath his white coat. He carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who had delivered difficult news too many times. He pulled a chair beside Harrison's bed and sat. "Sergeant Harrison, I am Dr. Rousseau. You have been in surgery for 6 hours. We did everything possible to save your leg, but the damage was too extensive. The femur was shattered in 11 places. The femoral artery was severed. Muscle tissue was necrotic. Infection had already begun. If we had not amputated, sepsis would have killed you within 24 hours. Harrison heard the words, but struggled to process them. He had known, intellectually, that the leg was lost. But knowing and experiencing are different countries separated by an unbridgeable distance. Where? His voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. Where was it amputated? Rousseau consulted his notes. Above the knee. We performed a transfemoral amputation, preserving as much of the femur as possible to allow for optimal prosthetic fitting in the future. The surgery was successful. No complications. You received 4 units of blood. Your vital signs are stable. Stable. The word felt absurd. Nothing about this was stable. His career, his identity, his future, all amputated along with the leg. Rousseau seemed to read his thoughts. I know this is devastating. You will grieve what you have lost. That is normal and necessary. But you are alive, Sergeant. Many men in your situation do not survive. The tourniquet your corporal applied saved your life. The French medics saved your life. Your own strength saved your life. What comes next will be difficult, but you are a soldier. You know how to fight. Harrison wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness, but exhaustion overwhelmed him. He closed his eyes, and Rousseau quietly left. Over the following days, Harrison remained in the French military hospital in Travnik, recovering from surgery and beginning the long process of physical and psychological adjustment. The morphine kept the pain manageable, but left him floating in a haze where reality and nightmare blurred. He dreamed of the explosion, reliving it in endless variations. Sometimes he saved Evans, sometimes they both died. Sometimes he woke, and his leg was still there. Evans visited on the third day, walking with a slight limp, a bandage wrapped around his head but otherwise intact. He sat beside Harrison's bed, and for a long moment neither man spoke. Finally, Evans said, "I'm sorry, Sarge. I should have seen the mine. Should have spotted something." Harrison shook his head. "Not your fault. Those mines are invisible until they're not. You did everything right. Jenkins said you helped clear the path, even though you were concussed. That took guts." Evans looked down at his hands. "The lads send their regards. Everyone at the base is talking about what happened. Command is investigating, trying to figure out who planted the mine. Intel thinks it was Bosnian Serb militia, laid there within the past week." Harrison absorbed this. The mine hadn't been waiting for him specifically. He had simply been unlucky, in the wrong place at the wrong moment. War didn't care about fairness or individual stories. It devoured without discrimination. Jenkins visited later that day, bringing mail from home and a bottle of whiskey smuggled past the nurses. "Against regulations," he said with a grin. "But I figured you earned it." Harrison managed a weak smile. They shared a drink, and Jenkins filled him in on the unit's activities, routine patrols, more aid deliveries, the endless grind of peacekeeping in a war that refused to end. Before leaving, Jenkins paused at the door. "You saved lives out there, Sarge. That convoy got through. Those villagers got their supplies. That matters. Don't forget that." After 10 days in Travnik, Harrison was stable enough for evacuation to Germany. A British military transport flew him to the Bundeswehr hospital in Koblenz, where he underwent additional surgeries to refine the amputation site and prepare it for prosthetic fitting. The German surgeons were meticulous, explaining each procedure in careful English. They spoke of rehabilitation timelines, prosthetic technologies, quality of life outcomes, clinical terms that felt disconnected from the reality of his shattered body and uncertain future. Physical therapy began 3 weeks post-amputation. A German physiotherapist named Klaus, a former paratrooper who had lost his own leg in a training accident years earlier, guided Harrison through the initial stages. "The phantom pain will be intense," Klaus warned. "Your brain still thinks the leg is there. It will send signals, create sensations in a limb that no longer exists. It is maddening, but it will diminish with time." Klaus was right. Harrison felt itches he couldn't scratch, cramps in muscles that no longer existed, stabbing pains in a foot that was gone. The psychological toll was as brutal as the physical. Fitting the prosthetic was an ordeal of measurements, adjustments, and trial fittings. The initial prosthesis was basic: a socket that fit over his residual limb, attached to a mechanical knee and a simple foot. Walking with it required relearning balance and movement patterns, building new muscle memory. Klaus pushed him relentlessly, refusing to accept excuses or self-pity. "You are a soldier," he would say. "Soldiers adapt. Soldiers overcome. Now walk." Harrison walked, fell, cursed, got up, and walked again. By late June 1993, 3 months after the mine strike, Harrison could walk short distances with the prosthetic and a cane. He would never run again, never jump from an aircraft or march 20 kilometers with a full pack. Those days were finished. The British Army medically discharged him with full honors in August, citing injuries sustained in the line of duty. He received the Queen's Commendation for valuable service for his actions in Bosnia, a certificate and medal that felt hollow compared to what he had lost. Returning to civilian life in the UK was disorienting. Friends and family welcomed him home, celebrated his survival, but he felt disconnected from their normal concerns: jobs, mortgages, weekend plans. He had seen children starving in Bosnian villages. He had felt his own blood soaking into foreign soil. How was he supposed to care about football scores or celebrity gossip? He attended veterans support groups, where other injured soldiers shared similar struggles. They spoke of survivors' guilt, purposelessness, the challenge of rebuilding identity outside the military structure. Harrison found work as a logistics coordinator for a humanitarian NGO, leveraging his military experience to organize aid shipments to conflict zones. The work wasn't soldiering, but it connected him to the mission that had cost him his leg, helping civilians caught in war's machinery. He learned to walk without the cane, eventually upgrading to more advanced prosthetics with microprocessor-controlled knees that adapted to terrain and movement patterns. Technology couldn't restore what was lost, but it made life more manageable. The nightmares persisted. He would wake sweating, heart pounding, convinced he was back in that overturned Land Rover, trapped and bleeding. Therapy helped, slowly teaching him techniques to manage post-traumatic stress. He learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days he felt strong, capable, almost whole. Other days the loss crushed him. Both were valid. Both were part of surviving. Years later, he would return to Bosnia as part of a veterans reconciliation program, visiting Vitez and the surrounding areas where he had served. The landscape had changed. Rebuilt houses, cleared roads, children playing where minefields once threatened. He met locals who remembered the UN convoys, the white vehicles that brought food and hope during the darkest days. An elderly man recognized the Cheshire Regiment insignia on Harrison's jacket and embraced him, thanking him in broken English for the aid that had kept his family alive. Standing on that hillside, looking across the Vitez Valley, Harrison felt something shift inside. The leg was gone. That fact would never change. But he had survived. He had helped others survive. The mine had taken his leg, but it hadn't taken his purpose or his humanity. He had carried the weight of that April morning for years, the what-ifs and might-have-beens. Now, finally, he could set it down. He placed his hand on the prosthetic beneath his trousers, feeling the hard plastic and metal that had become part of him. It wasn't the leg he was born with, but it was his leg now. The leg that had learned to walk again, to climb stairs, to stand firm. The leg that carried him forward when his mind wanted to retreat. The leg that proved adaptation was possible, that life continued even after devastating loss. The story of Sergeant Michael Harrison is not unique, though every detail of his suffering was deeply personal. Between 1992 and 1995, UNPRO-4 deployed over 38,000 peacekeepers from 39 nations to the former Yugoslavia, tasked with an impossible mandate: maintain peace in a war that all sides were determined to continue. These men and women operated in the gray space between combat and diplomacy, armed but restricted, present but often powerless. They witnessed atrocities they couldn't prevent, delivered aid that was never enough, and died in a conflict that wasn't officially theirs to fight. The human cost was devastating. During the Bosnian War, 167 UN peacekeepers were killed, and over 700 were wounded. Casualties inflicted by all factions despite the blue helmets and white vehicles that marked them as neutral. Landmines were among the deadliest threats, with Bosnia-Herzegovina becoming one of the most heavily mined countries in the world. An estimated 1 million mines were planted during the conflict, contaminating 4% of the country's territory and killing or maiming thousands of military personnel and civilians. The mines didn't discriminate. They waited in silent patience, triggering when pressure was applied, destroying lives in milliseconds. Harrison's injury on April 16, 1993, occurred during a period of escalating violence. The war had entered its second brutal year, with siege warfare in Sarajevo, ethnic cleansing campaigns across Bosnia, and humanitarian corridors routinely blocked or attacked. UNPRO-4 peacekeepers found themselves trapped between three armies: Bosnian Serb forces backed by Belgrade, Bosnian Croat militias supported by Zagreb, and the Bosnian government army defending a fragmenting state. The mandate to protect civilians and facilitate aid delivery proved nearly impossible when commanders on all sides viewed UN troops as obstacles rather than neutral arbiters. The psychological and physical toll on peacekeepers was immense. Unlike traditional combat where enemies were clearly defined and victory was the objective, peacekeeping required soldiers to absorb violence without fully responding, to witness suffering without the tools to end it. Rules of engagement were restrictive. Peacekeepers could only return fire when directly attacked, and even then, proportionality was paramount. This created agonizing moral dilemmas. Watch civilians be killed, or violate orders and risk international incidents. Many peacekeepers returned home with profound trauma, struggling to reconcile what they had seen with their inability to prevent it. Harrison's recovery journey mirrors that of thousands of veterans who survived catastrophic injuries in peacekeeping operations. The transition from active soldier to disabled veteran is brutally difficult, not just physically, but psychologically and socially. Military identity is comprehensive. It defines purpose, community, daily routine, and self-worth. When injury ends that career, veterans face the task of rebuilding identity from the ground up. The prosthetic replaces the lost limb, but nothing replaces the lost role. Therapy addresses trauma, but it cannot erase the memories etched into neural pathways by extreme stress. Yet within this darkness, there are points of light. Harrison's decision to work with humanitarian organizations represents a common pattern among veterans, seeking purpose through service, finding meaning in helping others who suffer as he once did. Many Balkan War veterans became advocates for mine clearance, peace education, and reconciliation efforts, using their experiences to prevent future conflicts. They speak at schools, meet with former enemies, share stories that humanize the abstract statistics of war. This work doesn't heal all wounds, but it transforms suffering into something constructive, giving trauma a purpose beyond mere survival. The village Harrison reached on that April morning in 1993, the one that received food and medical supplies despite the risks, survived the war. Its residents rebuilt their homes, replanted their fields, and eventually returned to something resembling normal life. They likely never knew the full price paid for that delivery, never learned that the sergeant who ensured their convoy arrived safely lost his leg on the return journey. But the connection exists, invisible yet real. His sacrifice was woven into their survival, one thread in the vast tapestry of small heroisms that allowed civilians to endure the war's horrors. This is the paradox of peacekeeping. Individual actions seem insignificant against the scale of the conflict, yet collectively they save thousands of lives. UNPROFOR is often judged a failure. It didn't stop the war, didn't prevent Srebrenica or other massacres, didn't bring the peace its name promised. But in the spaces between the failures, peacekeepers like Harrison kept supply routes open, evacuated wounded civilians, negotiated local ceasefires, and maintained the fragile infrastructure of hope that allowed society to rebuild once the fighting finally stopped in 1995. The physical scars of the Bosnian War remain visible decades later. Mine clearance continues. As of 2023, approximately 80,000 landmines still contaminate Bosnian soil, requiring ongoing efforts by demining organizations. Buildings still bear bullet holes. Mass graves are still being excavated. But the country has rebuilt, joined international institutions, and slowly healed the divisions that tore it apart. The peacekeepers who served there, including those who died or were maimed, contributed to creating the conditions that made this recovery possible. Harrison's story matters because it represents the human cost of choices made in distant capitals. When the international community decides to intervene in a conflict, or not to intervene, real people bear the consequences. Soldiers follow orders into minefields and ambushes. Civilians wait in besieged cities, hoping someone will help. The decisions look clean on paper: Security Council resolutions, rules of engagement, mandate limitations. But on the ground, they translate into blood and trauma, split-second choices with lifelong consequences, and young men like Harrison leaving pieces of themselves in foreign soil. What do we owe these veterans? Not just medical care and pensions, though those are essential. We owe them memory. We owe them the commitment to learn from their sacrifices, to understand what peacekeeping actually costs, and to make better decisions about when and how to intervene in future conflicts. We owe them the honesty to acknowledge that the missions we send them on are often impossible, the mandates contradictory, the outcomes uncertain, and we owe them the respect of continuing the work they began, building peace, preventing conflict, and protecting the vulnerable. Harrison walks today on a prosthetic leg fitted with technology that didn't exist in 1993. Microprocessors adjust the knee joint's resistance in real time, allowing him to navigate stairs and uneven terrain with relative ease. But no technology can restore what was lost: the sensation of grass beneath his foot, the unconscious grace of natural movement, the wholeness of an unbroken body. He carries the loss every day, a weight that never fully lifts. Yet he also carries something else: the knowledge that his sacrifice meant something, that the convoy reached the village, that children ate because he and his team took the risk. On the 30th anniversary of the mine strike, Harrison returned to Bosnia with a group of British veterans. They visited memorials, met with local communities, and participated in reconciliation workshops bringing together former peacekeepers and civilians from all sides of the conflict. Standing at the approximate location where his Land Rover hit the mine, the road now paved and safe, Harrison felt the weight of 3 decades. The pain hadn't vanished. The loss remained. But time had added perspective, showing him that his story was part of something larger, a collective effort to maintain humanity's fragile light in war's overwhelming darkness. The younger veterans in the group asked him how he coped, how he found meaning after such loss. Harrison thought carefully before answering. "You don't get over it," he said. "You get through it. And you find ways to make it count. The leg is gone. That's a fact I can't change. But I can change what I do with the time I have left. I can tell the story so others understand what peacekeeping actually costs. I can work to clear the mines still killing people 30 years later. I can stand here and say to these villagers, your survival mattered. You were worth the price. That gives the loss meaning. This is the legacy of peacekeepers like Harrison. Not grand victories or decisive battles, but the quiet preservation of hope in impossible circumstances. They stood between civilians and violence, often at terrible personal cost, maintaining the humanitarian space that allowed life to continue. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not romanticized or simplified, but told with full honesty about the cost, the trauma, and the stubborn courage required to keep serving despite everything. If you've listened to this story, you now carry a piece of Harrison's memory. You understand that peacekeeping is not the safe, noble mission often portrayed in speeches and press releases. It's young soldiers making impossible choices on dangerous roads, knowing that a wrong step could mean death or maiming. It's veterans living with phantom pain and nightmares decades after the conflict ends. It's the price of trying to protect the innocent when powerful forces want them dead. We ask you to honor that sacrifice by engaging with this history. Like this video if their stories matter to you. Comment below with your own connections to peacekeeping or the Bosnian War. Perhaps you served, or your family did, or you were one of the civilians they tried to protect. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue bringing you these real stories of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what service actually costs. Your engagement preserves the memory of those who gave everything so others might live. These are not just stories from the past. They're lessons for the future, warnings about the costs of intervention and the price of indifference. The veterans who survived, like Harrison, are aging. Their stories will soon exist only in recordings and testimonies. Don't let their sacrifices fade into forgotten history. Remember them. Honor them. Learn from them. That is how we give meaning to their loss, by ensuring it teaches us to build a world where fewer soldiers must walk roads seeded with death, where fewer families receive telegrams announcing life-altering injuries, where peace is more than a word painted on the side of vehicles driving through war zones. This is the legacy Harrison and thousands like him have given us. What we do with it is our choice and our responsibility.